Good morning. I'm Lori Matson, President and CEO of the Tri-City Regional Chamber. Thank you so much for joining us for the final sessions of the third annual Tri-Cities Diversity Summit. I hope you were able to join us yesterday and Monday as local leaders facilitated open, meaningful dialogue with experts and practitioners about issues that affect business and residents in the region. If you missed a session, please know that all sessions from the Diversity Summit will be posted on the Chamber's YouTube channel and at tricityregionalchamber.com. Today's first session will feature a discussion with local CEOs sharing personal stories and suggestions for companies to create a culture of inclusion through DEI initiatives and principles. Following this session is the keynote presentation by Scott Welch, Global Diversity and Inclusion Strategist. His presentation is entitled Change and the Culturally Competent Leader. Additionally, we'll announce the recipients of the Tri-Cities Champion of Diversity Awards to a deserving individual and organization. There's still time to register at tricityregionalchamber.com. Before we begin, allow me to thank Battelle, the premier sponsor of the Diversity Summit. We greatly appreciate their support and partnership during the past 3 years as the premier sponsor of this impactful event. Let's begin by welcoming our session moderator, Paula Linnen. Paula has been with Battelle for nearly 30 years, serving in a number of executive positions and currently as Executive Director of External Affairs. I have the privilege of working alongside Paula for the past several years in her role as Chair of the Regional Affairs Committee for the MyTri 2030 Regional Vision Project. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you very much, and good morning and welcome to everybody. Let me extend my thanks to each of you for joining us for our session today. We are so very pleased to have 3 local area CEOs spend some time with us to do it, and the role that it plays in the success of a business. Each brings a unique set of experiences and views, and so let me begin by giving you some brief introductions. Regional Medical Center since January of 2019. He originally joined the Kadlec team in July 2016 as the Chief Administrative Officer. Thank you for joining us today, Reza. Next, we have Valerie McCain. Valerie is a Senior Vice President with Bechtel and has led a number of complex national and international projects through the engineering, procurement, and construction process. She has nearly 30 years of experience in project management and leadership roles at projects and corporate offices across several continents. She currently manages a nearly $17 billion project with nearly 3,000 team members. Welcome, Val. And finally, we have Dr. Steve Ashby joining us. Dr. Ashby is a Senior Vice President of Battelle and Director of the Pacific Northwest Division. There he sets the strategic direction and oversees a $1 billion research and development organization and a team of 5,000. So welcome, panelists, and thanks so very much to each of you for spending your time with us today. It's really great to see all of you there.
Thanks, Paula.
So we're going to jump right in, and I have a question for you, Steve. I know that all of the panelists that are here today are part of a longstanding group of local CEOs in the Tri-Cities. This is a group of leaders that meets fairly regularly to discuss and share diversity and inclusion efforts. I'm wondering if you would start us off by telling us a little bit about this group and perhaps the genesis of the group and the value that you gain from participating in it. So Steve, start us off.
Okay, well, thank you, Paula. And thank you, Lori, and the entire chamber for hosting and organizing this event and going virtual this year. Battelle is very pleased to be a sponsor. It's something important to all of us. And it's great to see so many people from the community engaged in the summit this week, and from the small businesses to our civic leaders. So just many kudos to all of us for engaging on that. To your question, Paula, it was back, as I recall, I think in the summer of 2017, so 3 years ago, that I was compelled to write an op-ed that the Tri-City Herald was kind enough to publish. And it was something I wrote about the importance of diversity and inclusion within our community after hearing from some staff members and others in our community who had been subject to some rather disturbing and and some would say hateful experiences, unfortunately. And I knew that this wasn't representative of who we are as a community. I found the Tri-Cities to be very welcoming. And yet a few bad apples can really cause problems for all of us. And so I wanted to speak out against those few bad apples, and that's what I wrote that op-ed piece about. And it attracted some attention, and soon I was connected with some like-minded CEOs who also felt passionately about the importance of diversity and inclusion, not just within our organizations, but within the community in which we're operating, and that relationship being so important. And so we just started meeting, and breakfasts, usually HAPO's been kind enough to host those pre-COVID, but we kept together and meeting and just talking about different challenges that we face as leaders within our organizations, and also the importance of really fostering a very diverse and inclusive Tri-Cities community. And that led us to, a number of conversations among ourselves, but also with other civic leaders and organizations to get different perspectives. And it led us to take some actions. For example, there was a full-page ad we took out a few years ago about celebrating diversity, and that really resonated with staff and with others. And another action was choosing to participate in this panel today, and we're grateful to the Chamber for that opportunity. So that's a little background on the group, and I've just really enjoyed getting to know some of my colleagues a bit better, and learning that we're all in this together as far as the challenges we're facing on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Of course, Reza and Val are a part of that group as well as a number of others. So thanks for sharing that, Steve. So let me turn to all of our panel members. I'd like to start off by asking each of you to share really something very personally. Why are you personally passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion? What does it really mean to you? And Val, for this question, I'll start off with you.
Okay, thanks, Paula, and welcome everyone. I'm gonna share two reasons why I'm passionate about the topic, and I'd probably call them sort of key influencers for really what informs my approach on diversity and inclusion. One is kind of just a personal belief, and then the other is a personal experience. And I'm actually going to start with the experience first. The first time I heard about inclusion was probably about 12 years ago. It's much more of a common, diversity and inclusion, common terminology, maybe over the last 5, 6, 7 years. But 12 years ago, it was kind of in a seemingly different context than what I'm familiar with today. And it was about inclusive education. And it's where I saw firsthand the benefits of inclusive practices. My youngest son has Down syndrome, Matthew. And so when he was getting ready to start school, I was introduced to this approach of education. We were actually living in Australia at the time. And if you're not familiar with inclusive education, kind of simply put, it's just a model of education where students with special needs spend most of their time in, typical classrooms with non-special needs students. And, for those of you out there that might have special needs children or relatives, that it can take a lot of work sometimes advocating for your child. And since we move around a lot and have been in a lot of different places, we've experienced, some places it's really hard, and we're not always successful in maybe getting what we'd like from an advocacy standpoint. But what I learned about it is that there's so many benefits to inclusive education. And firstly, what it really does is it fosters this culture of belonging and recognizes that all people are valuable members of their community. And it benefits not only the student with the special needs. So in my case, my son, he not only benefits from being around his peers and having that sense of belonging and being like the others, but the other students in the classroom, they learn respect. They learn how to value other people. And I think they find out that people are maybe more common. They have more things in common than they thought. It kind of makes the differences a little less different, if you will. And so I think, it enriches everybody's lives. And so I think for me, that that kind of started informing my view because it's that personal experience. And frankly, before I had a child with special needs, I didn't really pay much attention to other people with those sorts of challenges. Might go by them or you see them out in the community, but really didn't pay much attention to it. Didn't, impact me, didn't know. But I can say now, with a different perspective that I have, my viewpoint has certainly changed, and I just have probably a much deeper, certainly a much deeper level of appreciation for people with those sorts of challenges. And I think as a parent, if you see your child excluded from something, or a sense that they are less than, it certainly drives home the point that feeling valued and having that sense of human, or that sense of belonging is really a core human need. And so really, that was my introduction to inclusion and diversity. And I think just the other reason is my firm belief that all people are unique. We're one of a kind. And I think therefore we have extraordinary value and should be treated as such. So from my perspective, it's not only the right thing to do, but it really makes good business sense as well. And I know we're going to talk about that, but it really comes down to treating people right. And that's sort of my personal reason for, which really informs my approach and passion for this topic.
Thanks, Val, for being so candid. It's those personal stories that I think are more memorable, so appreciate it. What about you, Reza?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I know we'll get into a lot of the business stuff later. On a very personal basis, I guess I would say I consider myself an American first and foremost, but I'm also a mixed race son of immigrants. And so I think I've had a lot of personal experiences, as we all have, through however we're raised or brought up, that inform the way we think about things. For me, inclusion and the ability to gather a lot of diverse voices and hear a lot about any given subject is always of value. And I've got a lot of personal experiences where I've gotten a lot of value from being around many different people from all sorts of walks of life. Second, I think the piece that resonates for me as a faith piece, continuously kind of learning and growing as a Christian, I've come to understand Jesus over my life as the very embodiment of an inclusive servant leader. And so I try, when I think about my approach to leadership, to always make sure that invitational culture is established and is a very important and a connected part of anything that I do. I don't always succeed, but try and try and try again. And I think that's an important part of who I am and how I'm focused. And third, I as anybody who works closely with me will tell you, I have an annoying habit of sort of viewing any issue through the lens of music or art in some way, shape, or form. And I think about this issue as, if you were at a museum by yourself staring at a painting, you'd get something out of it. But if you were sitting with a few friends with a whole lot of other perspectives, looking at that same painting and having a conversation about, hey, what do you see? It can be very different. Similarly with music, I grew up playing in bands and being very much a rock music fan. And so I think about that, you can listen to a song and as a guitar player, focus on what you love about the guitar part in the song, but then you sit down with your drummer buddy who says, hey, did you hear that drum fill 2 minutes and 15 seconds in? And no, I never really noticed that. And you go back and listen to it, and suddenly there's a much richer, deeper appreciation of the whole thing. So personally, those are three things that I think are part of who I am and how I'm oriented to all of this.
That's great. Music is definitely a way to draw people together. I appreciate that analogy. How about you, Steve?
Well, I just enjoyed hearing those two perspectives. That was great. So I am passionate about this topic, and part of it goes to my own personal belief system about treating people fairly and with respect. And so, on a personal note, two things. One, I'm not myself diverse. I'm middle-aged, maybe slightly beyond middle-aged white male. But I have to say that, when I'm out and about sometimes, and with other people who look like me, and I occasionally, people start slipping into making what I think are really offensive jokes, just some, what they think are being funny about ethnic or sexist jokes. I find that very offensive to me, and I try to call it out in an appropriate way or not, because I think it's those little acts of insults that can add up and contribute to things. And I know sometimes a lot of people just don't mean it, and people make mistakes, and you have to provide grace. But those are some of the personal moments for me that reinforce that we still have a lot to work to do. Another thing goes way back in my, a couple decades ago, reinforces for me why I think this is such an important topic for us to embrace, not just as individuals, but as a community. And I'm married to a woman who's Chinese. She's an immigrant to our great country. And so when we were young, we were looking at possibilities of where to go with our career. And I was interviewing in the South in our country, and ran into some of those personal comments I was just alluding to. And it really gave me pause, because although we didn't have children at that time, we knew that we would eventually, and they'd be mixed race children. And I was concerned about whether our future children would be subject to insults, poor behavior, hateful behavior, things like that, way back then. And that was one of the reasons why I decided not to pursue a career in that particular part of the country. Now, that was many years ago, and I don't mean to criticize the whole part of the country for one experience, but it was something in my mind with that particular community, and which is why fast forward to today, I think it's so important for us all to really embrace people and visitors, to be welcoming, and certainly in the Tri-Cities, where we really have found our success in welcoming people from all over the world and from across the country as they come here to find opportunity and to contribute to our various missions. So those are a couple of reasons why I feel personally about it, and why I think it's important for us to have this dialogue about steps we can do to continue to make the Tri-Cities a very welcoming place for all. So thank you.
So those are all very personal stories, and really thank you all very much for sharing that. Sometimes we're not always willing to do that, and I think it really helps people understand, where we're getting our own personal framing. So appreciate that. I think it's also clear that you all view diversity and inclusion as a business priority, and that's great. But I think it's so important for business leaders to understand its impact, DEI's impact on business success. And so to that end, Reza, would you share your thoughts on what uniqueness might exist in healthcare in terms of how you look at DEI?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for the question. I think health and healthcare, it's the most personal of services that can be provided. I don't think there's a lot of argument about that. And, we serve a lot of groups, and I'll describe, I guess, the groups. I tend to think of the groups that we serve and are part of in 5 categories. One is formal leaders, so everyone from our board members and our executive teams to our department managers and directors and those groups that are in positions of formal authority. The second group is our frontline caregivers who are interacting with our patients and families and the community. The third group is the patients and families themselves, which are very much integrated into our day-to-day existence at all of our facilities and are at the core what we're here for and what we're all about. Fourth group is the community sort of writ large, which we're more and more trying to get into getting further upstream with population health types of work to improve the health of those folks. And the fifth group is a group we don't talk about very often, but I'll call those the future colleagues. And so people that we may be trying to recruit to the community, trying to attract to become part of our organization, and groups like that. And all 5 of these groups, in my opinion, have to really work together in this kind of virtuous overlap in healthcare where everybody is working to support one another. And you've seen it during this COVID pandemic. The community cheers on the frontline healthcare workers when they're going through a hard time. The frontline healthcare workers are caring for the community that are going through all of this struggle. The leadership is trying to support the caregivers that they have a responsibility to serve and so forth. And if you don't have, I think, a very diverse set of folks in all of those groups in a balance where you are creating, again, that sort of virtuous overlap, you can get yourself down some pretty dangerous paths of siloed thinking or thinking that really doesn't serve the broader community, of people that you're working with or serving. And so as we think about the work that we're called to in healthcare, we've got the diversity and inclusion part for the groups that are internal to us. But then how is that reflecting the community that we're serving? How is that reflecting the groups of people that we're trying to draw and attract and recruit to us? How is that really affecting the greater good of the health of the community in so many ways? So I think for us, of course, I'm biased as a healthcare leader. I think it's so critically important in what we do. I think it's important in every walk of life. But I think that balance of monitoring and trying to help the health of the community, provide healthcare services, and also look at the populations that we employ and how they're reflecting those external populations is kind of a uniqueness to healthcare.
Well, it is so critically important, and amid this pandemic, that's been made even more apparent. So, thank you for that. Steve, kind of along those same lines of that, what have you discovered are the benefits or the value of having a diverse, inclusive workforce and inclusive culture, particularly in the context of leading a research organization? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I've actually spoken and written a bit about this, about the importance of diversity and inclusion to the success of the laboratory. And what we find is that you really do need to seek and engage people with diverse expertise, perspectives, backgrounds, cultures. And that leads to greater innovation and creativity, which really goes to the core of what we need in a research organization. So if you believe that for research you need creativity and innovation, I would argue that immediately leads you to embracing diversity and inclusion. You need diverse perspectives, and you need a diversity of ideas, which are born of different backgrounds and upbringings that people have, different disciplines they bring to it. And you need that in order to really be successful as a research enterprise. And I think so we embrace it from a business perspective for that reason. It's essential to us getting the best quality research. And that's what one expects from a national laboratory or any world-leading research organization. And, that's easy to say in the abstract, but I've also seen this personally. I've been a researcher in the past. I've led projects. I see it in the teams that we have at the laboratory today. And you can witness firsthand some really amazing results that are empowered when you bring together diverse teams and then you make sure their diverse talents are included and heard within that project. And so we do get better solutions for our many sponsors when we do this. I'd also note that this is not an opinion. As a mathematician, I can prove this with a little bit of calculus. And if there's time during a break, perhaps we could get out the whiteboard and we'll engage in that discussion. Unless anybody simply think I'm opining.
Ready, Steve. All right, go.
All right. And so this means it really is a business imperative, a scientific imperative, if you will. And I'd also point out, building on a point I think that Reza was just making, when we look at the people we want to recruit, especially the younger folks who are coming out earlier in their career, these are table stakes for them. Yes. If the organization they're looking at does not embrace diversity and inclusion in all its forms, they don't want to be part of your team. And so if you want to write off the next generation of talent, one of the best ways of doing that is to really turn them off by writing off diversity and inclusion as something that's important to your business. So I get it from a personal passion perspective, why I think it's important to me as a person, why I think it's good for a better research quality, and then also just from a business hard-nosed perspective of what I need to get the best talent and keep it in our enterprise.
That's great. You and I agree that facts and data are always important.
And calculus too.
And calculus too. I'll let you take that on. Turning to you, Val, let's talk about your industry and your experiences as well. What have you seen work in terms of building an inclusive culture?
Yeah, thanks, Paula. And I like what Steve was saying there, because I was thinking, oh, yes. I mean, I agree with so many of the points on that. And I think, with Bechtel, we're a global engineering, construction, and project management company that's been around for 120 years. And I think, we we help our customers deliver some of the largest and most complex projects around the globe. But we do it with really what our greatest asset is our people. And so I like to think that we're just really in the people business. And doing these projects all around, I mean, what we do is we have to build dynamic, diverse, mobile, high-performing teams whenever and wherever our customers need us to be. And so I always think about you got to do it quickly, and sometimes the duration is not for a very long period of time. And so I think that one of the things that we're understanding more and more is that really a key element of a high-performing team is inclusiveness. And so I think just from my own experience a little bit is that, having had the pleasure of working, multiple countries across the United States on complex projects, you do get to interface with different people from different cultures, beliefs, races, genders, age, the whole gamut of things. But what I found is that no matter what the location is, there's still that kind of common core thing that, kind of resides there with people, which helps when building a team. But they want to be valued, treated, with fairness and respect, and have that sense of belonging or connected to something. And those are really all attributes of inclusiveness. So what I think works then is that when you're creating the team culture, it's first recognizing that each person on the team is valuable. And then it's kind of what Steve said, you're embracing, that diversity out of the individuals, whether it's because of their gender, their race, their nationality, their thinking styles, their education, their life experience, all of those attributes that make us unique. When we can embrace that of our teams and kind of and allow people to express themselves and be their best person at work, it really fosters that inclusive environment. And the results, Steve mentioned some, but, motivates team members and engages them. It improves collaboration. The quality of our decision-making is much better. Ideas come forth, solutions come forth, and overall I see improved team performance. So it's much easier said than accomplished. And it really takes continued commitment and action. However, I think the results, when you have team members that really feel valued and part of that common goal, it's pretty powerful. So that's the perspective from my industry.
So it seems like you've all talked about clearly the value of diversity and diverse perspectives, and also that sense of common ground. And I'm just curious, this is just sort of a side question. Have you found that having an inspiring mission or goal or vision around which to inspire and rally people helps?
Well, I'll jump in. Yes. People, especially today, want to make a difference. And they want to work on something that's important. Mm-hmm. And I think just look at the three organizations that we represent, right? We're each doing big and important things that matter. Whether it's keeping one another safe and treating those who are ill, and the great job that Kadlec's doing. What Val and her team are doing to contribute to the environmental health of our organization, or what we like to do within Battelle to advance, frontiers of knowledge in a variety of areas. Those are things that when you go out there and you say, here's what we're trying to do, it does attract a lot of people who want to be part of that team. And that gets them at least to pay attention to who you are. But then they really want to understand a bit more about what are your values as an organization? What do you really bring to the table? And so I think the inspiring vision and mission can at least open a dialogue with prospective employees or with your current workforce, and keep them engaged or get them engaged. But you can have the most compelling vision and mission, but if your staff or prospective staff view as a bunch of jerks or dinosaurs, they may not want to join you on that journey, right? I enjoy playing golf, as many of you know, and I often get assigned just a random foursome if I'm the odd man out sometimes, and I join it, and I can tell you that when you're having fun and you see people you like to be with, you don't mind that 4-hour journey together. But there's been a couple times where I bailed out of the at the turn because I really don't want to be part of it with you anymore. I don't, and I think it's true for us as institutions and organizations, right? So you can share that vision of wanting to play golf or solving a problem for the world, but you've got to like the people you're with. And I think a big part of that then is, again, making sure they're feeling welcome regardless of their background, gender orientation, etc. And so it helps, but it's maybe necessary but not sufficient, to borrow another one of my math terms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. All right. Well, this good conversation. Given your personal passions and the business case that you all just articulated, I'm curious about what you have done as the chief executive, as an individual. What are you doing to set the right tone at the top for your organization? And Steve, I'm just going to go right back to you on that.
Oh, okay. Well, certainly it starts where you just said. You do have to communicate what your vision is as an organization. You can start with that, but if you're looking at setting the tone at the top with respect to this topic of the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it does mean communicating regularly and in different ways. Staff see and pay attention to what you're doing, what you're saying, whether it's within the organization or in a forum like this, where we're obviously stating our opinions quite publicly. And so as a leader, I look for an opportunity through all staff messages that go out to people, videotaped messages or meetings, presentations, in-person meetings, whether it's virtual or not, just in different forums, to get out and mention this or respond to it when it does come up. And so I think that's one thing. And it does help to let people know how important you find the topic to be, what your personal commitment is to it, and also, frankly, to reinforce expectations for inclusive behavior, say, within the workforce. And so that's one way in which you can project. It's also important that we listen and that we let what we hear inform our actions and commitments. And so, for example, at the laboratory, we solicited employee input via culture survey. It wasn't just about D&I, but overall in the culture. We wanted to hear from them what kind of culture they experienced from Battelle. And then, having heard that, we have formed some teams that are going to look at how we can follow through on some of the areas for improvement that our staff identified. Another area in which we set the tone from the top is our expectations for hiring and recruitment and advancement. We're constantly looking to improve the diversity of our workforce. It's improving, but not where we want it to be. And so I constantly communicate the importance of going out and attracting diverse pools of candidates before you interview, and what you do there, and challenging members of my team and other subordinate managers about whether we're just too easily going to the usual suspects and the usual places, as opposed to really reaching out and trying to expand our networks. And that's where I think our staff can help us. They've got networks. They've embraced different groups, and we can get them more involved in that. And then I'd say, finally, we also have to sort of walk the talk as we talk about these things and ask. It's part of it's about accountability. I encourage staff to hold me accountable as a leader and the leadership team. We make our goals available for all the staff to see. In fact, we just posted our goals, and diversity and inclusion is prominent among them. We have regular engagements with staff and discussions, and I can tell you, scientists and engineers are not shy about expressing their opinions to their leadership and expecting us to respond forthrightly. And so we do various assessments and really try to take a hard look. Try to be diverse within my own hiring on our team, and then again, just personally engaging people so they can hear directly and tell directly what they're seeing. So those are some of the ways I think I try to set that tone, and I think most staff know where I stand on this issue. It also means being willing to ask for forgiveness. I mean, when we had some listening sessions on another topic, I put out a communication that some staff misinterpreted. But because I had spoken often on this, they sort of knew where I stood on it, and I got a little bit of grace from some of those staff. But it's that willingness to have a respectful dialogue that I think leaders can really show, illustrate by good behavior and good example. So sorry to ramble a little bit there.
No, not at all. That's great. What could you add to that, Val? How do you set the tone from the top?
Yeah, I think those are really great things that Steve mentioned, and we do many of those same things within Bechtel and on projects. So I think maybe what I'd add to that is just to a couple of points relative to my taking responsibility for change personally. It's really I know that my leadership does that as well. And as I mentioned before, creating an inclusive culture really takes both commitment and action. And my behavior really matters. Steve said the same thing. The team looks to me and the leadership team to set the tone, and we have to model those right behaviors. And so it's really about walking the talk. Lip service, won't cut it. And I suspect if you're providing lip service on the topic, it's pretty easily detectable. So it requires, that kind of takes time to self-reflect, to be vulnerable and honest about what we don't know and what we need to improve on relative to our own biases, and have that willingness to learn and grow. And I think, while it certainly starts at the top, it also it really does require everyone at every level, every day, to kind of sustain an inclusive, to create and sustain an inclusive culture. But I do think if people get a hold of it, it is something that they can relate to, because hopefully, again, if you're going back to the basics of fairness, respect, feeling valued, no matter what your age, race, gender, everyone really wants that in the workplace. And so one of the examples we're doing right now is, and we're actively in the middle of it, is to help create a more inclusive culture on some of our projects, is developing inclusive behavior commitments or pledges. And so this is within work groups. It could be a group as small as 3 to 4 people on a team, or a larger work group. And they're talking about the topic about fairness, respect, and treating people right, and what that looks like in their group, and then coming up with some commitment statements and holding each other accountable. They're being virtually posted and shared. And I think I'm already hearing some really good kind of fruit coming out of that relative to the dialogue that's taking place, and the fact that we're getting everybody engaged in those discussions.
That's great. Thank you. Reza, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll add a couple things. And I really like that very actionable step that Val just described. I think I'm going to maybe talk to her a little more about how we can steal some of those ideas. There's sort of 2 categories I see this in, and much like what you heard from Steve and Val, I think there's the personal tone that you can set as an individual that happens to occupy this role and probably has more visibility than maybe some others. But there's also the responsibility to, structurally, what are you doing with the organization to set a tone? I'll start with kind of the personal. What I've been trying to do is, set a very high priority around having the humility and showing the humility that I don't personally know what the answers are to this. And I think there's a temptation sometimes with folks that are in executive roles to want to solve problems, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think showing up to this with a bunch of answers kind of goes against the whole premise of let's listen and try to better understand what it is that we're solving and how we can do it together. So that's been number one. I think that also gives others permission to behave in that way, and maybe role modeling that allows others not to show up so necessarily full of answers, but showing up with more of a listening mindset, as we've heard. I think the other piece for me related to that is just some things about the words you choose and words meaning things. And I'll go back to the question you asked earlier, Paula, about mission and values. And to me, it's very important that I personally set those up continuously as aspirational and try to avoid the words, this is who we are. I hear that said often, and to me, what that feels like is saying, I'm going to discount what anyone else perceives me or us as being because this is who we are, rather than saying this is what we aspire to be. And when we're falling short of that, call us out. Let's have a conversation. Let's work on that. So I think once you put that flag in the ground and say, this is who we are, you're kind of sunk, because you'll have people using your mission, vision, values as a bludgeon to show you how you're not living up to it in so many ways. Whereas if you focus on it being aspirational, it moves you forward and kind of avoids that trap. The other language I don't like that I try to steer clear from using myself is when I hear people saying, we need to make people feel heard. And I agree with that. I think making people feel heard is important. There's a catharsis to that, to people kind of saying their piece. But I think the next step, which is equally or perhaps more important, is you realizing that you need to hear them and you need that input and that you need to include it in order to be more effective. If your goal is to serve this broader group of people, just making them feel heard doesn't get you the whole way. They've got to feel heard, they have to be heard, and you have to have the humility to know that you need to hear them and take that to the next step. So those are some things, I think, just from a tone setting that I've tried to be mindful of in terms of the language I use, in terms of showing up with a certain mindset. And then structurally, I'll say a few things we've tried, and we've got a long way to go with a lot of this. Integrating into the structures when we talk about, these issues that we have with DEI being systematic and structural and all those things. To some extent, the solutions, I believe, need to be systematic and structural, as well as grassroots and in our individual behaviors. So we've done some things like over the last 3 years, we've been trying to integrate our medical staff into our leadership structure to involve their voices, talking about strategy and operations in a very deliberate way. Now, that doesn't necessarily get us to the diversity, equity, inclusion that we're talking about at all the levels that we need, but it gets a group of people kind of engaged. We've created a population health community collaborative that brings voices from across the community to help us inform the population health work that we're going to focus on, looking at health equity issues across the community. And that gives people a platform and gives us an opportunity to hear diverse perspectives on things that are going on throughout the community. One of the things that's going to be a big focus for us going forward with our board is we've got a committee now looking at, as we have members rotating off, in a very purposeful way, trying to make sure that new board members that we bring on board at Kadlec are reflective of all the things we've been talking about, the community that we're serving, reflect our priorities around diversity and inclusion and many of those things. So I think it's individual and personal tone plus responsibility as a leader to systematically and organizationally build approaches into what you do.
Well said. Steve, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
No, I just.
Well, if we have a little bit more time at the end, I may pull the string a little bit on something that you all commented on, and that is really hearing from people. And CEOs and leaders are often very intimidating to people, and I'm a little bit curious about how you can assure that people will tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And we may come back and explore that after our sort of next set of questions. But I really do want to go in a little bit to the times that we're in right now. And, considering the extraordinary social unrest that's occurring across the nation and the issues of racial justice that have been so prominent, let's talk a little bit about how this has impacted your employees or your teams and maybe your own leadership as you've reflected on it. And so, Reza, I'm going to go back to you and just ask you, what have you realized over this last year, and how are you then focusing your efforts going forward as a result of that?
Oh gosh, I think I've realized a lot, but still processing a lot that I'm sure I will only realize in far retrospect down the road. So I think the first thing I've realized is that there's a lot to learn. I think the main shift in my thinking over this time has been, that we've got to get much more proactive about systematically working on these issues. It's not enough for me individually or you or anyone just to say, hey, I'm going to show up and just sort of treat everybody with dignity and respect. And eventually we're going to get to where we need to in terms of certainly the health equity issues that we're working on, but all these other things that have become much more top of mind for us. I think for me, the biggest awareness has been I've got to do some things, again, with my own personal behavior, but also, in a position of leadership in a systematic, structural way to make sure that we're shaping the path, if you will, for this work to be successful and for people to feel invited into fellowship with each other to work on it. And that takes time. And I think realizing also that when we had these key moments over this summer when everybody was in a rush to kind of quickly come out and express whatever their feelings were about it, that's helpful to have that, a tipping point or something come about, but without a whole lot of energy and engagement and commitment for a long period of time, probably an infinite period of time, we're not going to make the progress we need. So it's been probably the biggest realizations for me, is just things that I need to do differently as a leader to try to help shape the path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the crux of this is that it has to be sustainable, and we're not subject matter experts in this area, not all of us. And so that active learning and listening and really reflecting is so important, I think. So, Steve, talk a little bit about what's been maybe the most surprising or challenging thing that you've seen as you've engaged your own and employees and staff in this very different time.
Sure. Let me just say, when we're experiencing some of the unrest, unfortunately continues, just had some more recent events come up. I really struggle, to be honest, with. Although it was clear to me individually, I was really repulsed by some of the images that we saw, and how some people have been treated, and it was just very disturbing. I struggled as a leader to know what or whether I should say anything within Battelle, within the laboratory, because we try to be apolitical on things, and so I was struggling with that. And I think one of the first things that was surprising to me was finding out how broadly felt opinions were being expressed within the laboratory, within the organization. And this was something that people were talking about around the proverbial water cooler, having very strong opinions about a variety of opinions. And so fairly quickly, I was getting people saying, Steve, you need to say something as a leader of the organization. And so I did speak out, but more important to the point I think was just being made, also wanted to listen. So the first surprising thing was just simply how this particular chord resonated so strongly with so many people on our staff who were looking for some sort of invitation to have a dialogue around it. We then, to the point of listening, had a number of listening sessions, which our executive team just went out and we invited staff to come and share their stories, their perspectives about how they felt about injustices they may think exist within Battelle and at the lab. And that led to another set of surprising discussions and some uneasy ones. And I had a number of staff members who were very brave about sharing their personal experiences, what they had personally experienced as racial injustice themselves or within their family. And it was pretty moving. And so those things were difficult conversations to have, I think, and that was challenging for us. But I also think it was surprising in a positive way to see how staff appreciate that opportunity to share and have that difficult dialogue. And one of the things we're trying to do now is look at how we can better equip ourselves as leaders and as just members of the team to have those kind of difficult conversations going forward. And so we're going to be putting out some training and things along these lines to help. And because what we heard is people said, look, we heard from staff, people are people of color, said, look, you as my manager, whether it's the lab director or a team leader, you may not be diverse yourself, and you say you don't know what to say, but just saying something to acknowledge it was better, far better than saying nothing for many of our staff, right? Not all of them. But many of our managers just felt ill-equipped to know what to say. And so I think what we want to do is better train ourselves for that. And I think what I was pleased with is that as the conversation around our country often got to very unpleasant and divisive tones, I think that within our organization, we're able to have very difficult conversations respectfully. And that's what I asked for. I said, look, let's not contribute to the high volume debate. Let's certainly not start yelling at one another. Let's start trying to understand one another. And so I think these are some of the things that we're still embarking upon. And just it was difficult to realize that we still have a lot more work to do. We like to pride ourselves as a forward-thinking, scientific organization, but we've got some work to do, and our staff were not shy about telling us that. So thank you.
Yeah, we are all very vulnerable in certain spaces, and having the tools and the training and support and facilitation really does seem to help quite a bit. So I appreciate those thoughts. Val, in addition to the unrest that I just mentioned and that we're all experiencing, we're also happen to be, as everyone knows, in the throes of a pandemic. And so has that changed anything in your approach to DEI?
Yeah, before I answer, I just want to comment on something Steve said, if I could, Paula. Just you started off, Steve, with saying we didn't know what, should I say something, what to say, and I felt the same thing, and I think leadership in my company felt the same thing. But people did step up. But I have to say, the group here that we have on the Diversity Council, because we got together pretty rapidly, that was really helpful. So I think it just shows the power of connecting and people and talking and being open with one another, because I learned a lot just from that, kind of dialoguing and kind of hearing some of the perspectives, and it gave me a little bit of the push I needed. And so I just wanted to thank you for your role in that, and just the power of people talking. So yeah, this has been a challenging year, Paul, with the pandemic. I think I put down the word you just said, Steve, ill-equipped. You were talking, but I feel like, in many ways we're ill-equipped on the pandemic too. I mean, it kind of put us all in some uncharted waters. And so I don't know if it really if it changed my approach to things, but what I would say from a D&I perspective, it's probably really highlighted some things or reinforced. And I think the thing that comes to mind is empathy. Really that understanding and compassion for people, because it's not a muscle, I think, that we have used collectively kind of, in our businesses and stuff as much. And I think with having one, either people being laid off in the company, or, I think about just teleworking, most people going out into a teleworking environment, being so uncertain about things, whether it's, their job, their kids' schooling, life events going on, illness, all of those things. I think, and it was happening across our companies, across the nation, frankly. So I think that we learned that our leaders really play an important role in connecting and keeping the team connected, and that skill of being empathetic and is really important, so they can advocate for the team. And so I think, we tried, and I know others here, to be as flexible as possible with work schedules, understanding, working parents. I think they call it pandemic parenting right now, and really asked our employees to extend as much grace towards their employees as possible, and working with trying to make, whatever accommodations we could. And I think, but what I think we learned, we learned a lot more about our people. You learn from simple things like, okay, who had family, who has pets, who has kids, who have kids with different learning styles, who's got elderly parents they're taking care of, or other situations. And so I think there was a just deeper connection with our teams, which will help us in being more inclusive, and really kind of just, bringing the team together, and really, again, sort of really appreciating the value that everyone brings. So I think from that perspective, it's a good thing, because coming out of COVID, when we do. And, if we go into something that looks like the old normal at all, we're going to be stronger from an inclusiveness standpoint. And I think that empathy muscle that we've exercised has gotten stronger, and it's going to take us to better places. So I think that's what it highlighted to me.
Gosh, that's a great summary, and I can hear the passion in your voice, and putting that empathy front and center matters a lot. So I will tell you, we have about 5 minutes left, 4 minutes to be precise, and I'll just offer one last final question, and I'm not going to put it to any one individual, but I will just note that these are obviously very challenging times, and this has been a call to leadership for so many. So as you think about the business community and the many business leaders that have joined us for the call today, anybody have any final tips or observations or anything they'd like to share before we close out? I'll just offer that up.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a few things, Paula. One, I would say, and I don't know who all is out listening, but I would say don't overthink this too much, and don't let it intimidate you. We talked on a kind of a wide variety of things this morning, from both sort of the behavioral things to a lot of the structural things that our companies are doing. And you probably realize that there's also so many just diverse perspectives on diversity itself. I mean, that was evident just in the three of us talking here. However, I think that we probably can agree at its core, it's really about kind of applying that golden rule, treating people right. And so if you start there, it becomes really less complicated. And so I don't, depending where you're at on this journey, some of you may have made some, strides on some of those structural things, whether it's looking at your hiring practices, retention practices, and those sort of things, or some might just be looking to take some first steps. And I think for those in that category, I would encourage you to just start with some easy, practical, yet intentional actions that can be done either in your company, or if you're a team player, or just individually. Your area of influence, it might be one other person, it might be a larger group, a big team of people. But some examples I would give, just simple things, is weekly check-in meetings with your team or colleague. It may sound like a simple thing, but we don't always do it. And if you've got people you haven't really touched and gotten to know, that's a simple thing you can do. At your team meetings, you might have a team rally in the morning, or a end of the day meeting, or just a regular staff meeting. Have an inclusion topic that you share. Pick a topic like respect. Lots of things you'll find about it, and then share it at your next meeting. The commitments that I talked about earlier that my team is working on, behavioral commitments, easy thing to go do and make some pledges and hold each other accountable. Surveys. Hold focus groups, get your team engaged to kind of have them look at opportunities to dig deeper in your culture. So I think, there's no one size fits all. And I think Steve said it earlier, or Reza, we don't have all the answers. Nobody really does. But I think it's getting out of your comfort zone. And if you joined us today, it's because you care about this, or you're curious. And either one of those are pretty good ingredients to get started. So I would just encourage you to go start making a difference.
Wonderful. Reza and Steve, I'll give you 30 seconds each if you have additional comments.
Listen.
How succinct and well said.
I would also say, to exhibit leadership is also about really living your values. And I think that in these times, we need to have the courage to speak out when we do see injustice, and to invite those kind of difficult conversations that we've been talking about. So we all have different skill sets we're bringing to this, and different needs in our organizations. But as leaders, we all need to demonstrate that leadership and listen to people. So thank you very much.
So Reza, Valerie, Steve, thanks so much for sharing your wisdom, your insights and your ideas for how leaders might lead in this incredibly important area and time. It's an area that's honestly just vital for the health and vibrancy of our nation. And so it's a big deal. And Lori, thanks so much to you and the Tri-City Regional Chamber for providing a forum to explore these topics. You have no idea how much we appreciate it. Really. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Paula, for moderating, and Val, Dr. Ashby, and Reza for sharing your personal experiences and expertise. In addition to gaining many actionable ideas to take back to the workplace today, I'm certain that our audience was inspired by your ideals and your leadership. I know I certainly am. So thank you so much. Our keynote session begins at noon, and if you haven't already done so, you can register at tricityregionalchamber.com. And this has just been a perfect tee up for our keynote, which is change in the culturally competent leader. So we hope you'll join us. And in addition to that, we're going to be celebrating the Tri-Cities of Diversity, or the Tri-Cities Champion of Diversity Award recipients. We have 2 awards we're giving out. So we hope you'll join us. And again, thank you to our moderator and our panelists this morning. And thanks to all of you for joining us.